This is going to be a beginner's guide to Orc. It's going to go over general matchups, what people are thinking, and what openings you can do. The reason I like this is because Orc is very strong in the second position, and it doesn't really have many bad matchups in the first position, and it has a couple of very dominating matchups early game on first position. The only matchup it really gets crushed on is Orc versus Undead in first, and Undead is the second most common first position after Night Elf. So if you are playing Orc and you get Night Elf, you're very happy. If you're playing Orc and you get Undead, you're very sad. Um, so that's the general gist of it. Third position Orc, because Orc is the least reliant race about on money, it's not very ideal. You can still pick it third, but the other two lanes are a lot stronger. The reason first position is pretty good is because it's the lowest income position in the game and has 60 less seconds. And the reason why second position is good is because Orc doesn't have a counterable opening at all. There are no races that can counter Orc in the opening. They basically guaranteed win the middle. And I will go over as to why very soon. So here, a very common opening is to go run Grunt and place it in the back. I would prefer people place it in the front, especially in Classic, just for very specific timings. That's 4 seconds of gold guaranteed loss if the opponent places in the front. And then there's the walk distance from here to here plus the kill distance. So it's about 14 seconds of gold. And after you get this middle, you hold it for about 24 seconds until this player spawns. So if your second position is human, human will likely never build a unit if you're winning if you're winning at the beginning. So you're at most getting 24 seconds of gold and you're losing 14 seconds of gold. It's in my opinion a very weak opening unless your second player is also going to contest middle. But yeah, I don't really enjoy it. But you can also build nothing as Orc, or you can position the Grunt at the front. All of them have their trade-offs. There's in this game in particular, because there's a human after you and you know you're going to lose position 2, I would prefer he take the gamble and put the Grunt at the front, but it's very minor. Okay. So Grunt wins the middle. He lost 4 seconds of gold because he didn't place in the front, and the human didn't really contest, or the Night Elf didn't contest it. It's okay. He goes triple Grunt, this Toby, and it's human, so he wins for free. The 2 strongest openings in the game are both by Orc. Triple Grunt will only lose 2. Air, so you can go 1 Gargoyle, 1 Dragonhawk, or 1 Fairy Dragon, and it will leak into the third lane. But it will beat any ground army. If you're worried about the Gargoyle leaking for whatever reason, or the Fairy Dragon leaking, or the Dragonhawk leaking, you can go double Grunt and 1 Headhunter, and that will beat anything. So the only matchup where Orc kind of has to worry about this mind game is the Orc versus Undead matchup, where they can go fast tier 2 into single Gargoyle. The other popular openings are double Grunt into Hero, which I believe is very, very strong. Or you can do triple Grunt, sell a Grunt, and then get a Hero, which is also not so bad. This is a very, very common strategy that Boat Goblin used to do. He would guarantee winning the middle, and you only lose 40 gold, but you guarantee the win. there's a few general strategies you can go as human that are very common. One is hero stack, and you get Sorks with invisibility and Priest with inner fire, and you stack up your hero. Um, and you might get Orb of Darkness. This works in some matchups, especially if they're like if the first position was undead and they were massing ghouls, or the player one forced them to mass ghouls, and then you just spawn a lot of skeletons and win that way. But if your lanes aren't winning, or sorry, if your lanes aren't losing hard early, it's very, very hard to do the hero stack build. Uh, you don't get the experience and you don't get any of the benefits of it. So when your other lanes are winning, you kind of want to be more greedy as human, and you'll see a faster tier 3 almost every game. The alternative is the other kind of way people play human is they go straight for tier 3 and they get spellbreakers and sorceress and priests, and they get polymorph, and by the end game, after like minute 13, Orc has very few options against polymorph. They can do hero stack and get Breath of Fire on Panda, or Farseer being a high level with Chain Lightning. But since you're not really building much as human, it's very tough. One thing to note, though, is that it's kind of an important detail. If Orc went double grunt will almost always telegraph getting a hero fast, or getting triple raider, and 2 grunts and 3 raiders positioned correctly can basically kill this tower, as well as lower your army. So you have a little mini game as human if you see double grunt. If he goes triple grunt and sells a grunt and gets raiders, he can still get, I believe, 3 raiders with that timing, and he'll have 2 grunts and 3 raiders. And that's also very dangerous. So human kind of has this early game mind game with Orc that they always have to play, where they have to scan at the last 7 or 8 seconds and reposition their units. So keep in mind, it takes about 1 second for the trigger to move a unit to untarget itself. So you can realistically only move 4 units at the 4-second mark, 5-second mark. So if you're very fast as a human player, and you follow where this little builder is going, you can usually get enough to delay the grunt raiders so that it takes minimal damage on the watchtower. So that is a mini game that happens. Toby doesn't choose to do that. It's okay. But I think Toby should know. Let's see if he knows that there's a human player. He does not know that there's a human player, so probably he should have been asking for a scan from yellow or red, since he doesn't know what this race is and he won middle already. But he chooses not to do that, or the team doesn't do that. So not great. This is not a very good build against human. You don't really... It's not bad, but it's not as ideal as something like having 2 grunts in the opening, or just even 1 grunt, because the human kind of knows your army composition a bit more, and there's less flexibility that you can do without selling a unit. So not ideal. But you know, it's not the end of the world. Okay. So I scan here. If he tries to cheeseless raiders, you always have to scan early against orc. It's really annoying. This positioning is amazing, I think. There's a chance that some of the units here, well, if they were all at the bottom, two of these raiders would have been aggroed, and these top two units would probably have run by completely. So Frank's positioning is kind of weird, and if the Night Elf player had faster hands, he could have, since there's only 4 units, he could have moved his units to the second row or bottom row, lured half this army, and then he would have won the fight outright. So this kind of positioning by Orc is very risky. It's also incorrect because there's no unit at the front, so the Night Elf player actually won, even though the Orc army is much stronger and much better at this point of the game. In general, the Orc player will completely crush the Night Elf player until a few things happen. The Night Elf player stays low tier and goes like a very aggressive hero like Pit Lord or even Beastmaster. Beastmaster is a very situational hero at this matchup, but still doable. Or they go Panda. And even with all of those 3 hero choices, the Orc player will still be a lot stronger. But you can, as a Night Elf, kind of fight back. The trade-off with staying at like tier 1 is that you will lose the mid game and you won't be effective until the 17-minute mark. And if the Orc player knows you're staying at low tier, he has very strong options to just outright beat you for the first. I mean, he can even beat you at the early game until you get 8 Huntresses out. You're kind of giving the how should I say this? You're kind of giving Orc the pressure of throwing the game. And there's very little you can do. But it's not the end of the world. Like, it's very common to see people go Pit Lord and mass Huntresses and Dryads and then get tier 2 at like the 5-minute mark, 6-minute mark, and get a Druid of the Claw plus mass Talons. And you'll see like 5 or 6 Huntresses, a couple of Talons and a Claw, and a Pit Lord or a Panda. The Orc player, if they're good, they can just steamroll that by going Walker, Grunts, Raiders. Really they can get, if they go Farseer, it will be a total slaughter. If they go Tauren Chieftain, it will be like favored for them, but not a total slaughter until the end game. And if they go Tinker, they will totally slaughter the Night Elf army early. Like, it's just not the strongest build. It is good against Tauren Chieftain first if you're, and it might win the lane, but there are other heroes that Orc can do against mass tier 1 Night Elf that are very, very strong. So unless the Orc player makes a big mistake, it's not the best thing to do. Cool. So let's move on. Toby gets a fast tier 2. There's a timing here for double raiders. I think this is really brain dead against human. It doesn't, there's not, like, what is human going to do at the only way this is acceptable? No, he knows it's human now. So the only way that Walkers is an acceptable counter is if the human makes like really bad units like footmen, and you can just do the Walkers next round. So this is a very bad unit to build this early. It makes no sense. It doesn't beat anything that the human player can build, and it doesn't serve you any purpose. It doesn't beat Dragon Hawks. You would need a Headhunter to beat Dragon Hawks. It doesn't beat I mean, it beats Footmen, but humans will never build Footmen. The human doesn't have enough gold to get Knights, so it doesn't beat a unit they can't have. It doesn't beat Hero because magic damage does reduce damage to Hero. And the grunts will beat mass casters at this point in the game, since they don't have any upgrades. So I'm not really sure why you got a Spirit Walker here. It's a very big mistake against humans. Burning away gold. The only time you can is if they went like mass footmen at the beginning. Human can go mass footmen, but it's so bad against Orc because of the Spirit Walkers do like 50 damage and attack to a footman. So it's yeah, this is a very, very bizarre choice of unit by Toby. Ideally he would sell a grunt and go triple raider, which is possible, or he would just save the gold, honestly, and get a hero plus an item. This is just, there's no reason to have built the Spirit Walker. Unless, no, there's just no reason. Like, this lane won't do anything, the human player can't do anything at this point in the game. I could see an argument for getting a Headhunter or two to counter the Dragon Hawks. It's quite common for human to go 2x Dragon Hawk here. But I don't know. This doesn't counter anything. It's a pure bad. It beats one Dragon Hawk if he makes 2 Spirit Walkers, but man, it's just so. Even humans will rarely even get 1x Dragon Hawk here, because if they get a Dragon Hawk or 2x Dragon Hawks, they'll just die to raiders instantly. So usually what the human will get is some combination of spellbreakers and casters and try to slow down the army so that the third player can fight the orc player at the tower. And they only take maybe 2 or 3 hits from pillage. Again, I don't get it, so this is my analysis. So what I would have preferably loved to see, and this is a very matchup specific hero choice, because this player is Orc and this player is Night Elf, and because Orc has a very strong early game against Night Elf, that means the Orc player will almost always leak to the tower for the first 8 minutes. And that means that if you get a hero now, you will always get experience on that hero, because the Orc army will always be weak, but it will always be pushing a little bit. So I would have loved to see a hero here, preferably Beastmaster, because while Spellbreakers are really good against Beastmaster, if the Beastmaster is under level 3, the second you get level 2 Bear, and you have enough spells to lure out the Spellbreaker's mana, then the level 2 Bear will never be stolen. It's very rare to see the level 2 Bear getting stolen, just because Orc is so dominant against human in general. So in this situation, Beastmaster is probably the strongest hero Toby could have gotten. And he could have sold a grunt to do it. If you do the double grunt Headhunter, one advantage is that you barely lose gold over a scan once you find out the race. So it's very, very advantageous to do double grunt Headhunter and sell the Headhunter. It's one of my more enjoyable openings. It will lose to triple grunt if it's an Orc mirror, so keep that in mind. But It beats everything else, in my opinion. Um, okay, so that is the early game. In orc versus human, um, human has a lot of what I would like to call free wins against orc. So if orc goes a hero before the human player goes a hero, and that hero is not Beastmaster or Farseer, the human player has an instant win card called Tinker. Um, so there's a lot of onus for the orc player to force out a hero before they get a hero, with very few exceptions. Like, this is one of those games where it would be good to get a fast hero because you know that lane 1 is always pushing in as the orc player. And it's a lot of experience. Like, you will see that this orc player would be 2, maybe 3 levels higher if he got the hero out faster by the end of this game, if you watch the replay. And it's probably the biggest reason why the second team lost. So, it's not the end of the world if you don't do it, but you should be cognizant of the first lane matchup and who wins the early game, as the second position player. So let's go over what choices the human has for heroes. If they get a hero first, which human will always get the hero first because they need the hero since all of the orc units counter all of the human units. There's a few options. Panda is very good if lane 1 is losing, because once the panda hits level 3, the orc player can't really do anything. And even though human is weaker units, level 3 panda is just too dominating over orc in general. So you'll see that. I don't like it here because lane 1 is a winning lane for team 1. Like, at least until the 10-minute mark. So getting this panda early serves no purpose at all. It probably would have been better for him to just not have built anything. But it's a small issue. And try to just counter out the raiders as he sees them come in. The other heroes that human can get are Tinker. It's a free win against any melee hero orc gets. But you will very rarely be able to go Tinker because orc players know that if they get a hero before the human player and that hero is melee, they lose the game instantly. So you won't see good players go a melee hero first as orc. They'll always wait for the human player to get a hero first. The only hero that Tinker doesn't outright crush is Beastmaster as human, so it's something to be cognizant of. It's very important to know that matchup, or those hero matchups, because as an orc player, you get a melee hero and then you see a Tinker, you're just like, okay, just remake the game. That's what it feels like. The other heroes that are very common as human is Blood Mage. And the thing is, at level 5, the Blood Mage will one-shot all of the Spirit Walkers, even if they have Spirit Link on, unless there's a Shadow Hunter. So a Shadow Hunter won't out-heal the damage a Blood Mage does. So late game, Blood Mage is very strong against Orc. And another common hero, if all of the lanes are losing, a human player can pick Archmage. And if the Orc player gets a little bit fancy and they go Aura 3, and they're pushing to the fortress, the Archmage Blizzard will hit the Orc army at the tower, and there's a very high chance that the okay, sorry. When I mean like Archmage,
I mean, like, if the orc is on lane 1 and the human is on lane 2, you probably don't want to get the archmage in orc versus human in general, just because blood mage is more dominant. I take that back. But if the orc player gets level 3 aura and you're human as the next position, the spawn timings are very, very bad for the orc, and it's very common for a TC to get level 3 aura and just lose outright to a human stack, even though they're winning the whole game. So, a common thing you'll see is when you see an archmage, the orc player at the position before won't even level up the third aura. They'll stay at second aura until they know they can win the game, or they'll get it at level 7 instead of level 5 because of the archmage being such a scary counter push threat. Um, okay, so that's human heroes. There's really only 3. There's blood mage. There's, oh, sorry. There's a couple more. There's mountain king. That mountain king is really good. It's very similar to panda. It's really good if position 1 is pushing. Ideally, that position 1 is a human player who's messing tanks against an undead player. So if this was undead and this was human, and the human is winning lane with paladin, you would get a mountain king, and clap is a little bit better than breath of fire against tanks. And the stormbolt hard counters paladin because it goes through, it blocks divine shield. So mountain king is very viable against the human first that's winning the lane. And you sometimes can go paladin, which is a more of a win more hero as well. It's more of, again, it would be if this player was undead instead of human. You might be, there's, paladin is a very viable option as this human player for a counter stack, especially if your third position is night elf, because the divine aura is very good with mountain giants. And I'm there's probably a few pocket moves with Beastmaster. Beastmaster is always a situational hero that can just dominate the game. And like if the orc player got Beastmaster here, it would be very hard for the human to do anything. It would, and this orc player would just be feeding the Beastmaster experience until the 8-minute mark, 9-minute mark, and orc versus human is a very hard matchup in general. So the even though they have spell breakers and can steal the bear, they're just not going to have enough money to do that, and it's going to be rough for the human player. Like, okay, so that's the human versus orc hero matchup. And yeah, we will go through this game. Cool. Okay, so let's look at this. This is a, so Night Elf is still losing. It's very hard for Night Elf to come back. If the orc player had a single Spirit Walker instead of 3 Raiders, he would have won a lot harder. Something to keep in mind. 1, 2 Grunts plus 3 Raiders plus 1 Spirit Walker. Much, much stronger than 3 Raiders and 2 Grunts. The positioning from the Night Elf player is complete trash. But if the Night Elf player positioned better, he could have made it so that only 5 units would engage with him and take extra damage. The way the Night Elf player could have done that is he could have put the Dryad at the front and moved everything to the top lane. But in general, Night Elf should never be winning. Just because the Night Elf player is winning before the 8-minute mark and taking the gold, it's more of a it's more of the orc misplaying than the night elf playing well. Uh, okay. So all of his units are red. If the night elf played better, uh, he might have actually won that fight and took a little bit of stonks. But this is pretty solid. If there was one Spirit Walker here instead of one Raider, these units probably wouldn't be red. They'd probably be an orange life. So he still got a pretty good result. But he could have gotten an even better result if he played it slightly better. Okay, so we've got a few grunts and 2 Spirit Walkers versus this. This is like this orc, I feel, is completely misplaying this matchup at this point. Yeah, if purple upgraded invisibility, let's see if he does. He does not. He would have forced. I think he still would have forced the orc player to go scan, which is sad, but maybe not. This is just like way overkill by the orc player. Like, he's not helping any of his lanes. He's not scaling up for the end game. Like, even a second gold mine for the orc player would be better. This is really bad, I think, by orc. Yes, this army composition is what you want against human later on, but you're just giving human ways to come back into this game. Like, it's so bizarre. Okay, well, anyways, the important thing to note is that Toby did see his hero, I think, for the first time, and he saw the hero stack. The purple's hero got no experience, so both of these players are not playing great. And what that means is that now Toby can go Farseer and completely crush the second lane, as well as have a very good matchup against the orc player with Chain Lightning. It's if you think your other 2 lanes are getting crushed, there's an argument for getting Tarn Chieftain because he'll get experience, and you might be able to carry, but you won't have as much game presence as you would with a Farseer. The other option is Beastmaster. So, I already explained my thoughts on that hero. I think he'd be really strong here, even with the misplays going on. Alright, cool. So there's a Tarn Chieftain out against this Panda. Does he get any items on the Chieftain? Let's see. He goes Endurance, Aura, and this. So, what's going on here? Okay, so the Beastmaster leaks. I'm not actually sure which army is stronger. Orc should still be dominant at this point of the game. He's got a much better army comp. The walkers will destroy the Druid of the Claws. They don't need upgrades, but he should get one by the time we engage. Let's see if he does. Oh, the walkers get sniped. So because the walkers get sniped, this is a very easy Night Elf victory. But most of the time that does not happen. So the walkers get sniped. He probably got the upgrade during the battle. But like I said, the Night Elf, until they get a Chimera out, they're kind of on the back seat. Sorry, not a Chimera, a Mountain Giant out. They're kind of on the back seat. Let's continue. Cool. We should go over the Orc versus Night Elf hero choices. I think Panda is the strongest hero against Orc. If you're staying at tier 1 for a long period of time, Pit Lord is not a terrible option, but the tier 1 battle means that you'll definitely lose the mid game and you'll probably lose the late game. Against Orc, you probably want to always get the Tauren Chieftain against Night Elf. The Chain Lightning is not very good against Mountain Giants or Chimeras. The Stun's pretty good against Panda, and the Orb of Corruption. So Farseer is kind of okay. I think probably the next strongest hero. Shadow Hunter, you definitely don't want to go. You don't want to get into a long fight against the Night Elf. They do too much damage. Pit Lord wouldn't be so bad. It's quite good against most of the Night Elf units. The problem is, once Night Elf gets 3 or 4 giants, the Pit Lord kind of fades away, and at the very late game, the Pit Lord will do nothing until it gets to level 8 or 9. So there's a very long timing window where the Pit Lord becomes useless. And there's definitely some pocket strategies you can do with Alchemist first, but I think in general, you almost always will get Chieftain against Night Elf because you have this huge timing window where you can get experience. And you'll usually get at least level 2 before he gets a giant out. Likely even level 3 if your team, your third position is losing at the right times. Or if you're pushing very hard with your third position, you might get level 3 before you get enough Mountain Giants. Okay, so the Night Elf is going to tier 3. Let's look. He has 74 gold. The timing for this feels kind of awkward. But I think the Night Elf player really needs tier 3 in general, but this could definitely have been timed much better. I think this is a unoptimized build by the Night Elf player. This is not ideal. You don't want to have 75 gold and tier 3 ending at the beginning of a round. You want the tier 3 to be ending like at the 10-second mark as a Night Elf player, and then you want to sell your Hippogriffs and Archers. So realistically, the Night Elf player could probably have had 2 more Archers here and still get all his gold back and still have the tier 3 timing on time. I think the Night Elf player really wanted Druid of the Claws, which I don't think is correct. I don't think you want the upgrade as much as you want more units. I don't think it's as good. But the Night Elf player really wanted that Druid of the Claw upgrade. So he ruined his timing. And he gets punished for it. Yeah, like I said, the Night Elf player, there's not much they can do before tier 3. They're gonna lose. Cool. And I think that's it for openings in the tutorial. What you'll typically see on Orc versus Human is either a hero stack, Spellbreakers and Casters, or and Knights if positioned correctly so the hero tanks most of the damage. You'll see a Tinker, and if you get a melee hero, you lose. Or you'll see just Breakers, Casters, and Blood Mage, I think are very common. And as Orc, you'll want to get Grunt, Walker, Raiders, 1 Kodo, a couple Breakers around a couple Shamans around the 13-ish minute mark. And maybe even Taurens if there's no undead player. It's very good against human. Especially if the human player doesn't get enough sorceress, you can sometimes just kill the human outright and leak over to the next wave. For the Orc versus Night Elf matchup, you'll typically go Grunt, Raider, Walker, and if the Night Elf player does not, if the Night Elf player is not getting chimeras at the 14-minute mark, you can start adding Taurens, and even if he goes one or two chimeras, if you have a hero with orb or one or two headhunters in the hero with orb, the orc player should still have a very kind of decent matchup at tier 3 against one or two chimeras. But once the Night Elf gets 3 chimeras and like 4 or 5 mountain giants, your Taurens are worthless. So you can mix in some Taurens, but keep in mind that if you go more than 2, you're leaving yourself very vulnerable to 3 chimeras, and it's something to keep in mind. Like, you might be able to win, especially if your other teammates have air superiority, but yeah, Torrent, like, there's not much Orc can do late game to chimeras except go Wind Riders. And very well positioned headhunters, which after about 5 headhunters, it's unmanageable for Orc. So at that point, you need your teammates. So in general, Orc versus Night Elf is a early game, first 8 minutes completely free for the Orc player. Basically nothing the Night Elf can do. From minute 8 to 13, the Night Elf player is advantaged. From minute 13 to 17, it's even-ish again, because you get a tier 3 spike as Orc. And you have Taurens against their Mountain Giants as well as the Reincarnation. And then after minute 17, it's a complete stomp. So if you don't have TC 5 by 17, you probably lost. And those are about the timings you want to think about. And then for human versus Orc, it's kind of the opposite. Orc will still dominate early, but human will have a pretty big... Human will probably be on even fighting terms for a few minutes at around the 8 or 9 minute mark when they... no, they'll still be losing, sorry. Human will just be losing for the first 13 minutes against Orc. And there's very little the human player can do. But if they can somehow get experience on their heroes, they are much better than Orc late game. The Panda and the Blood Mage and the Archmage are just too strong. Even a level 6 Tauren Chieftain is not as strong as those heroes late. So the Orc player is pretty reliant on his other lanes winning. And yeah, that's those are the matchups. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments.